You know, there are bad days. The kind where you spill coffee on your shirt or catch a red light when you're already late. And then there are the kind of days that shatter your entire reality into a million jagged little pieces, which is exactly where Elena Vance found herself on a rainy Tuesday in Chicago. Elena was the kind of woman who didn't just walk into a room, she conquered it. A 34-year-old CEO of Vance Dynamics who had built a billion-dollar empire on defense contracts and sheer, unadulterated ruthlessness, known in the industry as the Iron Lady because she seemingly had a heart made of titanium alloy and a blood type of pure ice water. She stood in the middle of her executive garage, surrounded by gray concrete and the hum of ventilation fans, staring at her midnight black Pagani Huayra Roadster, a $3 million masterpiece of Italian engineering that was currently refusing to start, treating her with the same silent indifference she usually reserved for her employees. "Fix it." She hissed into her phone, her voice echoing off the cold walls, speaking to her personal mechanic who was currently trembling on the other end of the line, trying to explain that the diagnostic computer was reading gibberish. But Elena didn't care about gibberish. She cared about results, about control, and right now, for the first time in a decade, she had neither. 3 hours later, after firing the mechanic and threatening to sue the dealership into the Stone Age, her executive assistant, a terrified young man named Kevin, handed her a tablet with a shaking hand and whispered about a place called Stone's Garage in the industrial district, a place wedged between a welding shop and a diner that smelled like old fryer grease, a place that had 5 stars online but looked like it barely had a roof. "You want me to take a Pagani to a place that probably fixes lawnmowers?" Elena asked, her eyebrow arching in that way that usually preceded a termination letter. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and Elena Vance needed to be at a gala in 24 hours to close the merger of the century. So she watched her baby get loaded onto a flatbed and followed it into the gritty underbelly of the city. Stone's Garage was everything she hated: chaotic, loud, smelling of ozone and motor oil, and when she walked in, her Valentino heels clicking against the stained concrete like gunshots, the music stopped, the conversations died, and every grease-stained head turned to look at the woman in the $3,000 coat, standing in a puddle of dirty water. "I need the owner," she announced, not asking, demanding, and a man slid out from under a lifted Ford F-150, wiping his hands on a rag that was already black with grime. Caleb Stone wasn't what she expected. He was tall, maybe late 30s, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and eyes that were unsettlingly calm. The kind of calm you see in soldiers or monks, people who have seen the worst the world has to offer and decided to keep breathing anyway. "That's me," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. "Can I help you? Or are you just here to inspect the floor tiles?" Elena bristled, hating his lack of deference, hating that he didn't seem to know or care who she was. "My car," she gestured to the Pagani being unloaded. "The electrical system is dead. My team says it's unfixable. I need it running by tomorrow night." Caleb looked at the car, then back at her, and let out a short, dry laugh. "Lady, that's a Huayra. You don't just fix the electrical system overnight. It's got a hybrid architecture that's more complicated than the space shuttle. I'm booked out for 3 weeks. I'll pay you triple," Elena said, reaching for her checkbook. "Quadruple." "Name your price." Caleb just looked at her, his expression unreadable. And then he turned his back on her to tighten a bolt on the Ford. "Money isn't time," he said over his shoulder. "I got other customers. Single moms who need to get to work. Contractors who need their trucks. They wait in line. You wait in line." Elena felt the blood rush to her face, a mix of fury and shock because nobody, absolutely nobody, told Elena Vance to wait in line. She walked right up to him, stepping into his personal space, smelling the scent of Old Spice and metal. "Listen to me," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I am not a single mom. I am the person who can buy this entire city block and turn it into a parking lot. Fix the car." Caleb stopped working, slowly setting down his wrench, and stood up to his full height, looking down at her with those dark, unblinking eyes. "You think you're special because your bank account has commas in it?" He asked softly. "Let me tell you something. Machines don't care. Pistons don't fire harder for billionaires. But tell you what, I'll make you a deal. He wiped a smudge of grease from his cheek. I fix your car by tomorrow. If I do, you give me whatever I ask for. No negotiations. If I can't, I close my shop and work for you as your personal grease monkey for a year. Free of charge. It was an arrogant bet, a stupid bet. And Elena Vance loved it because she never lost. Deal, she snapped, but when you fail, I want you in a uniform by Monday. She turned on her heel and marched to the waiting area, sitting on a plastic chair that stuck to her coat, prepared to watch him fail, prepared to gloat. But he didn't fail. For the next 12 hours, Elena watched something that looked less like mechanics and more like surgery. Caleb didn't just look at the engine. He listened to it, his hands moving over the carbon fiber and gold leaf heat shields with a tenderness that made her look away. He hooked up a laptop that looked like it belonged to NASA, his fingers flying across the keys, bypassing the factory limiters, rewriting code, tracing circuits with a multimeter like he was defusing a bomb. He didn't eat, he didn't drink, he just worked with a singular, terrifying focus. By 4 a.m., the shop was silent, and Elena had dozed off in the chair, waking up only when the roar of a twin-turbo V12 shattered the quiet. A sound so pure and aggressive it made the windows rattle. She stood up, blinking, as Caleb wiped his hands and leaned against the fender, looking exhausted but victorious. It wasn't the battery, he said, his voice raspy. It was a microfracture in the ground relay for the ECU, creating a ghost voltage. I ray-routed the circuit and reinforced the connection. She's alive. Elena walked around the car, stunned, listening to the perfect idol, realizing that this man in dirty coveralls had just done the impossible. You fixed it, she whispered, looking at him with a grudging respect she hated to admit. I did. Caleb nodded. Now, about my payment. Elena pulled out her checkbook, ready to write a number with 5 zeros, ready to buy him off and leave this dirty little shop forever. How much? 10,000, 20. Caleb reached out and gently took the checkbook from her hand, closing it. Keep your money, he said, and then Elena wanted to throw it at him, wanted to scream that she didn't need life advice from a mechanic, but the weight of the metal in her hand felt strangely grounding. Fine, she spat, if that's your price. You're a fool. She got in her car and peeled out of the garage, leaving him standing in the exhaust fumes, telling herself she would never see him again, never think about his dark eyes or his stupid metaphor. She was wrong. 3 weeks later, the universe decided to teach Elena Vance a lesson in humility. She was in her private parking garage beneath the Vance Dynamics Tower, late for a meeting with her CFO, Julian Thorne, a man who smiled too much and whose ambition felt like an oily film on her skin. She slid into the Pagani, pressed the start button, and instead of a roar, there was a pop, a hiss, and then the cabin began to fill with thick, acrid white smoke. Panic, primal and terrifying, clawed at her throat as the doors locked, automatically, a safety feature malfunctioning in real time. She pounded on the glass, coughing, eyes burning, watching flames lick up the side of the hood, realizing with a horrifying clarity that she was going to die in a $3 million coffin. Just as the darkness started to creep into the edges of her vision, the glass shattered. Security guards dragged her out, coughing and retching, onto the concrete floor, dousing the car with foam. She lay there, gasping for air, her lungs burning. And the first thought that cut through the haze wasn't about the insurance or the meeting. It was him. She grabbed her security chief's phone, her hands trembling uncontrollably, and dialed the number on the business card she'd kept next to the spark plug. It's on fire. She choked out when Caleb answered. He didn't ask who it was. He didn't ask why. He just said, I'm coming, in a voice that promised violence to whatever had hurt her. When Caleb arrived, he didn't look at her. He went straight to the car, ignoring the fire marshal, diving under the charred hood with a flashlight. He spent 10 minutes in silence, his jaw tightening until a muscle feathering in his cheek looked like it might snap. When he finally stood up and walked over to where she was sitting on the bumper of an ambulance, he looked dangerous. This wasn't an accident, he said, his voice low and lethal. Someone bypassed the safety cutoff I installed. They stripped the fuel line and ran it directly onto the exhaust manifold. This was rigged to blow the second the engine got to temperature. Someone tried to kill you, Elena. The world tilted on its axis. Sabotage. Murder. Elena looked at the charred remains of her car, then at Caleb, realizing that he was the only person in this entire city of millions who was telling her the truth. "Help me," she whispered, the ice finally cracking. "I don't know who to trust. You trust me," Caleb said, reaching out a hand, not to shake, but to pull her up. "Come on, you can't stay here." He took her to the one place nobody would look for a billionaire CEO, his small, weathered bungalow on the outskirts of the city, a place with a patchy lawn and a porch swing that squeaked. And that's where Elena met the reason Caleb Stone wasn't building rockets for NASA anymore. Sitting at the kitchen table, coloring in a coloring book with intense concentration, was a 7-year-old girl with pale skin and a tube running from her nose to a portable oxygen tank. "This is Lily," Caleb said, his voice softening instantly, the dangerous edge vanishing. "Lily, this is Elena. She's having a bad day." Lily looked up, her eyes huge and wise beyond her years. "Did you break something?" she asked. Elena touched the soot on her face, feeling tears prick her eyes. I think I broke everything." "That's okay," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Daddy fixes everything. He fixed my heart, almost. He's working on it." Caleb looked at Elena, and she saw the pain behind the calm facade. "She has a congenital defect," he murmured while Lily went back to coloring. "I used to be lead engineer at Horizon Aerospace. I quit when she got sick. The hours. I couldn't be absent. I needed to be the one checking her monitors at night. So now I fix cars. It pays the bills, and I'm home for dinner." Elena looked at this man, a genius, who gave up the stars to save his little girl, and felt a shame so deep it burned hotter than the fire. She had judged him, belittled him, and he was twice the human she would ever be. "Show me your list," Lily said suddenly, holding out a crayon. "What list?" Elena asked. "The good things list," Lily explained, as if it were obvious. "When things are scary, you have to write down the good things so you don't forget them. I have 42. Ice cream is number 1. Daddy is number 2. She pushed a piece of paper toward Elena. "You start." Elena stared at the blank page. She thought about her billions, her awards, her magazine covers. None of it felt good. It felt heavy. It felt cold. Finally, she picked up the crayon and wrote one word, alive. "That's a good start," Caleb said from the doorway, holding a laptop. "But we need to add safe to that list. I pulled the data logs from your car before the fire melted the memory core. The hack came from an internal IP address. Someone inside Vance Dynamics." Elena's blood ran cold. "Who?" "I don't have a name yet," Caleb said, his eyes narrowing. "But the encryption signature? It's sloppy, arrogant. Whoever did this wants your job, and they're tired of waiting." Elena thought of Julian Thorne, her CFO, the man who had been pushing for a merger she didn't want, the man who looked at her chair like it was a throne he deserved. "Julian," she breathed. "We need proof," Caleb said. "Real proof, not just digital footprints. We need a confession." "How?" Caleb looked at her, then at the charred car keys in her hand. "We stopped playing defense. We use the one thing he wants more than anything against him. We use you. We set a trap." The plan was insane, reckless, and relied entirely on the psychological profile of a man who thought he was smarter than everyone. In the room, Caleb's plan was simple: bait the shark. Elena had to go back to work. She had to walk into that glass tower as if nothing had happened, as if the fire was just a mechanical fluke. But she had to look weak. She had to look shaken. She had to make Julian Thorne believe that the Iron Lady was finally rusting. For the next 2 days, Elena played the role of a lifetime. She flinched at loud noises. She let Julian catch her staring blankly at walls. She canceled meetings, and all the while, Caleb was in the shadows, disguised as a new IT contractor, rewiring the executive garage with cameras and microphones, turning the kill zone into a stage. The bait was the black box Caleb fabricated, a story that the Pagani had a secondary, military-grade black box that survived the fire, a device that recorded not just mechanical data, but audio inside the cabin. He planted the rumor that this box was being stored in Stone's garage. waiting for the authorities to decrypt it the next morning. It was a lie, but to a guilty man. It was a ticking time bomb. That night, the rain returned to Chicago, turning the streets into slick mirrors of neon light. Caleb and Elena sat in the darkened office of his garage, watching the security monitors. The shop was silent, shadows stretching long across the floor where other cars sat waiting for repair. Lily was safe at her grandmother's house. It was just the two of them, the hum of the servers, and the tension pulling tight between them. "You really think he'll come himself?" Elena asked, adjusting the oversized hoodie she was wearing. Stripped of her designer armor. "He's arrogant," Caleb whispered, his eyes glued to the screen. "He doesn't trust anyone else to do it right. He botched the fire. He won't risk a hired gun messing up the cleanup. He needs to destroy that box personally." At 2 a.m., the back door lock clicked. It wasn't forced. It was picked with a digital decoder. On the screen, a figure in dark clothing slipped inside. He moved with the confidence of someone who owned the world. He walked straight to the safe in the back office, the decoy safe Caleb had set up. Elena watched, breath held as the figure pulled down his hood. It was Julian Thorne. But he wasn't alone. He pulled a suppressed pistol from his jacket. "He's armed," Elena gasped, grabbing Caleb's arm. "We have to call the police now." "Police are 2 minutes out," Caleb said, his voice calm, but his body coiled like a spring. "But we need him to open the safe. We need the intent." On the screen, Julian drilled the lock. He opened the safe, grabbed the dummy black box, and then he stopped. He pulled out his phone. "It's done," Julian said, his voice crystal clear over the hidden mix. "I have the drive. The mechanic is unfortunate collateral. Burn the place down with him inside. Make it look like a gas leak." Caleb's eyes went wide. "He's not leaving. He's lighting a match. We have to get out." Elena cried, but Caleb was already moving, not toward the exit, but toward the bay door. "No," he shouted. "He's rigging the gas main. If I don't shut the valve, half the block goes up." Caleb burst from the office into the main garage floor. "Julian," he roared, his voice echoing off the steel beams. Julian spun around, the gun snapping up. "Mr. Stone," Julian smiled, a cold, shark-like grin. "You really should have stuck to changing oil." "It's over, Julian," Elena shouted, stepping out onto the catwalk above. Terrified but refusing to hide. "The cameras are live. The feed is going. Straight to the police cloud server." Julian's face twisted. "You." He raised the gun toward Elena. Bang. The shot went wild as Caleb threw a heavy wrench with quarterback precision, smashing into Julian's hand. The gun skittered across the concrete. Julian howled, clutching his shattered fingers, and lunged for the weapon. But Caleb was already there. He didn't fight like a gentleman. He fought like a father protecting his cub. He tackled Julian, slamming him into a tool chest, tools cascading down in a metallic rain. Julian fought dirty, gouging at eyes, kicking, screaming about how he deserved the company, how Elena was weak. But Caleb had the strength of a man who carried oxygen tanks and fought death every day. He pinned Julian to the ground, arm barred behind his back, just as the sirens wailed and the bay doors were kicked in by SWAT. The aftermath was a blur of blue lights and handcuffs. Elena stood shivering in the rain, watching Julian being shoved into a cruiser, screaming legal threats that nobody was listening to. She looked over at Caleb, who was sitting on the bumper of an ambulance getting a cut on his forehead bandaged. He looked tired, battered, and absolutely magnificent. She walked over to him, ignoring the press, ignoring the police. "You saved my life," she said, her voice trembling. Again, Caleb winced as the medic applied antiseptic. "Part of the service. Comes with the oil change." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw that the Iron Lady was gone. In her place was just Elena. "You okay?" "No," she admitted, laughing through a sob. "I'm really not. But I think that's on my list of good things."